3 true KFC horror stories. Story 1. The Grease Trap, Part 1. My name is Terrence, and I was 22 years old when this happened. I worked the overnight shift at a KFC in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was a Wednesday night, 1:50 a.m., and I was alone in the kitchen cleaning the fryers when I heard someone knock on the drive-through window. The restaurant had been closed for 2 hours. The parking lot was empty. But someone was standing at that window knocking slowly, patiently, like they had all the time in the world. When I walked over to see who it was, the knocking stopped. And then I saw the handprint on the glass. It was red. Before I continue, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy true scary stories. And keep listening, because what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about safety. Part 2. I had been working at that KFC for about 3 years. I started as a cashier when I was 19, fresh out of high school, trying to save money for community college. By the time I was 22, I had worked my way up to shift supervisor, which meant I got the privilege of working the overnight cleaning shifts twice a week. The overnight shift was not too bad. The restaurant closed at 11, and my job was to deep clean everything before the morning crew arrived at 5. Scrub the fryers, mop the floors, sanitize the prep stations, empty the grease trap. It was hard work, but I liked being alone. No customers to deal with, no co-workers asking me questions. Just me, my earbuds, and a mop. The KFC was in a strip mall on the south side of Baton Rouge, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a dollar store. The neighborhood was not great, but it was not terrible either. We had the occasional drunk stumble in at closing time, and sometimes homeless folks would ask for leftovers. But nothing serious ever happened. That Wednesday night started like any other. The closing crew left around 11:30, and I locked the doors behind them. I turned off the dining room lights and started my cleaning routine, working from the front of the store to the back. By 1 a.m., I had finished the dining area and moved to the kitchen. The fryers were the worst part. The oil had to be drained, the vat scrubbed, and the whole thing refilled for the morning. It was hot, greasy work that left my arms covered in burns and my clothes smelling like chicken for days. I was elbow deep in the fryer when I heard the knock. Part 3. The drive-through window was on the opposite side of the kitchen from where I was working. The knock was faint at first, almost polite. 3 soft taps on the glass. I pulled off my rubber gloves and walked toward the window. The drive-through speaker was off, and the menu board lights were dark. There should not have been anyone in the drive-through lane at 2 in the morning. I reached the window and looked out. No one was there. The drive-through lane was empty. The parking lot beyond it was dark, lit only by a single streetlight at the far end. I could see my car parked near the dumpsters, but nothing else. I figured I had imagined it. Old buildings make strange noises. Maybe a branch had blown against the window, or a cat had jumped up and knocked against the glass. I was about to walk back to the fryers when I noticed the handprint. It was on the outside of the glass at about chest height. A full handprint finger splayed wide, pressed against the window. And it was red. Not blood red, more like a rusty brown, like dried blood that had been there for hours. But I had cleaned that window at the start of my shift. It had been spotless. I stood there for a long moment staring at the handprint. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. It was just A handprint. Maybe someone had touched the window during business hours and I had missed it. But the color. That color was wrong. I grabbed some paper towels and glass cleaner and wiped the handprint away. The red smeared across the glass before coming off, leaving faint streaks behind. I told myself it was nothing. Ketchup, maybe, or barbecue sauce. Someone had probably touched the window with dirty hands, and I had not noticed. I went back to cleaning the fryers. Part 4. At 2:15 I heard the knock again. This time it was louder, more insistent. Not 3 polite taps, but a steady rhythmic pounding. I walked back to the window. My hands were shaking a little. I did not know why. Again, no one was there. The drive-through lane was empty. The parking lot was dark. But there was another handprint on the glass. Same position, same size, same rusty red color. And next to it, there was a second handprint. And a third. They trailed across the window, moving toward the edge of the glass, like someone had been pressing their hands against the window as they walked past. I backed away from the window. This was not ketchup. This was not barbecue sauce. Something was very wrong. I pulled out my phone and called my manager. It went straight to voicemail. I tried the assistant manager. Same thing. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone left handprints on my window. They would think I was crazy. I decided to check the security cameras. The monitor was in the manager's office, a small room off the main kitchen. I walked quickly through the store, flipping on every light I passed, chasing away the shadows. The security system was old, just 4 cameras recording to a DVR in the office closet. I pulled up the feed for the drive-thru and rewound to the first knock. At 1:50 a.m., the drive-thru lane was empty. Then, at 1:51, a figure stepped into frame. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. His face was turned away from the camera, so I could not see his features. He walked slowly to the drive-thru window and stood there, facing the glass. Then he raised his hand and knocked 3 times. I watched myself appear in the kitchen window looking out. The man stepped back out of the camera's view just before I reached the glass. He had been there. He had been standing right outside, watching me. And he had moved away just before I could see him. I fast-forwarded to the second knock. At 2:15, the same figure appeared. This time, he was closer to the window. And this time, he did not just knock. He pressed his hands against the glass. Both hands' fingers splayed wide. Then he dragged them across the window, leaving long streaks behind. And then he looked up at the camera. Part 5. I will never forget that face. Pale skin, sunken eyes, a mouth that seemed too wide for his face. He was smiling, but it was not a normal smile. It was the kind of smile you see on someone who's just thought of something terrible. He stared directly into the camera for 5 seconds. Then he turned and walked out of frame, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hit the buttons. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Terrence. I work at the KFC on Greenwell Springs Road. There is a man outside my building. He's been knocking on the windows, and I think he's trying to get in. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line. She said officers were being sent to my location. I stayed in the manager's office, watching the security monitor. The drive-through lane was empty. The parking lot was empty. The man was gone. Then the screen flickered. All 4 camera feeds went to static at the same time. The image scrambled, then went black. And then I heard footsteps inside the building, coming from the back door. I had locked it when the closing crew left. I was sure of it. But the footsteps were real. Heavy, deliberate steps moving through the storage room towards the kitchen. I looked around the office for a weapon. There was nothing. Just paper pens and a stapler. I grabbed the stapler anyway, holding it like a hammer. The footsteps stopped right outside the office door. Part 6. I held my breath. The office door had a small window frosted glass that let in light, but did not show clear images. I could see a shadow on the other side, a tall, thin shadow standing perfectly still. The door handle turned slowly. The lock held, but only for a moment. I heard a click, and the handle turned all the way. The door swung open. He was standing there, filling the doorway. Up close, he was even more terrifying. His clothes were stained with something dark, and his hands were covered in that same rusty red. His eyes found mine, and that horrible smile widened. "There you are," he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "I have been looking for you, Terence." He knew my name tag. I was still wearing my name tag. I threw the stapler at his face and ran. I did not have a plan. I just ran, shoving past him, feeling his fingers grab at my sleeve and miss. I sprinted through the kitchen, slipping on the wet floor, crashing into the prep table. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps echoing on the tile. The front door. It was locked, but the key was in my pocket. I fumbled with the lock, my hands slick with grease and sweat. The footsteps were getting closer. The lock clicked open. I burst out into the parking lot, the night air hitting my face like a slap. Red and blue lights filled my vision. A police cruiser was pulling into the parking lot, siren wailing. I ran toward it, waving my arms, screaming for help. The officer slammed on his brakes and jumped out, hand on his gun. "He is inside," I shouted. "There is a man inside the building." Part 7. The officer called for backup and told me to wait by the cruiser. Within minutes, 3 more police cars arrived. Officers surrounded the building, covering the exits. 2 of them went in through the front door. I watched through the windows as their flashlight beams swept across the dark interior. They found him hiding in the walk-in cooler, crouched behind a rack of chicken. He did not resist when they dragged him out. He just kept smiling, that same terrible smile, looking at me the whole time. One of the officers came over to me, while the others loaded the man into a cruiser. "You okay?" he asked. I was shaking. I could not stop shaking. But I nodded. "You are lucky you called when you did," he said. "That guy had a knife on him. Big one looked like a hunting knife, and he had some other stuff in his pockets. Zip ties, duct tape." I felt my stomach turn. "Who is he?" The officer shook his head. "We are running his name now, but it looks like he might be connected to some other incidents in the area. Women have been reporting a prowler near their homes at night, someone matching his description." He looked back at the building. "He must have been watching this place, waiting for someone to be alone. You are the night cleaner, right?" "Yeah." "He probably knew your schedule, knew you would be by yourself." Part 8. The man's name was Eugene Pratt, 43 years old. He had a record breaking and entering assault stalking. He had been released from prison 8 months earlier, after serving 5 years for attacking a woman in her home. The police found a notebook in his car. It had details about several late-night workers in the area, their schedules, their vehicles, their routines. My name was on the list. He had been watching me for 3 weeks. The rusty red substance on his hands was not blood. It was rust and dirt, mixed with something else the lab could not identify. But the police found blood in his car. DNA that matched a woman who had gone missing 2 weeks earlier. They found her body 3 days later in a drainage ditch outside the city. I quit my job at KFC the day after the incident. I could not go back there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face in the doorway, that horrible smile. I started having nightmares. I would dream about cleaning the fryers, hearing the knock on the window, turning around to find him standing right behind me. I would wake up sweating, heart pounding, convinced he was in the room with me. I moved out of Baton Rouge a few months later. Got a job in a factory up in Shreveport, working day shifts with 100 other people around. I never worked alone again. But I still think about that night. I still wonder what would have happened if I had not called 911 when I did. If the police had arrived 5 minutes later. And sometimes late at night, when I hear an unexpected knock at my door, I freeze. My heart races. My hands shake, because I know what is waiting on the other side of some doors, and I know that some people never get the chance to open them. Story 2. The Family Meal Part 1. My name is Carlos, and I was 35 years old when this happened. I stopped at a KFC in rural Oklahoma on a late-night drive from Dallas to Kansas City. It was around 11:40 p.m., and the dining room was almost empty, except for me and one other customer. He was sitting in the corner booth watching me eat. At first, I thought he was just some lonely guy, maybe a trucker like me. But then I noticed he did not have any food in front of him. And he'd been sitting there for over an hour in the same position, never moving, never blinking, just watching. Before I tell you what happened, hit that subscribe button and comment where you're listening from tonight. Because this story could happen to anyone who travels alone. Part 2. I had been driving trucks for about 12 years by that point. Long-haul routes, mostly moving freight from coast to coast. I had seen a lot of strange things on the road. Weird roadside attractions, bizarre rest stop encounters, the occasional breakdown in the middle of nowhere. But nothing had ever truly scared me. That changed in Oklahoma. I was making a run from Dallas to Kansas City, a route I had done dozens of times. It was November, and the nights were getting cold and dark. I had left Dallas around 6 p.m., planning to drive straight through and arrive by morning. Around 11:30, I started getting hungry. I had skipped dinner to make good time, and my stomach was starting to complain. I saw a sign for a KFC at the next exit, and decided to stop. The restaurant was in a small town off Interstate 35, the kind of place that exists only because of the highway. A gas station, a motel, a few fast food joints, and not much else. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in just a few cars, and a pickup truck parked near the entrance. I went inside and ordered a 2-piece meal with mashed potatoes and coleslaw. The cashier was a tired-looking teenager who barely made eye contact. The place had that late-night emptiness, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of old grease hanging in the air. I took my tray to a booth near the window and started eating. That is when I noticed him. Part 3. He was sitting in the corner booth as far from the counter as possible. Middle-aged, maybe 50, with thinning grey hair and a weathered face. He was wearing a plaid shirt and jeans standard rural Oklahoma attire. What caught my attention was his stillness. Most people fidget. They check their phones, look around, shift in their seats. This guy did none of that. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table in front of him, eyes fixed on me. I told myself he was probably just zoning out. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was half asleep. There were plenty of explanations. But as I ate my chicken, I kept glancing over at him. And every time I looked, he was still staring. Not at the room, not at the window, at me. I finished my meal and got up to throw away my trash. As I walked past his booth, I noticed two things. First, there was no food on his table. No drink, no napkins, nothing. He had not ordered anything. Second, his hands were not just folded, they were clenched. Knuckles' white fingers intertwined so tightly the tendons stood out against his skin. I kept walking. I told myself it was nothing. Just a weird guy in a weird town. I would be back on the road in 5 minutes, and I would never see him again. But when I pushed open the door to leave, I heard his voice behind me. "Where are you headed, friend?" Part 4. I turned around. He was standing now about 15 feet away. He'd moved silently, and I had not heard him get up. "Kansas City?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Long drive," he nodded slowly. "That is a long drive. Lonely too. Easy to fall asleep on a road like that. I am used to it. You want some company?" The question hung in the air. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "No thanks," I said. "I prefer to drive alone." He smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. "Suit yourself," he said. "Drive safe now. Lot of bad things can happen on a dark road." I pushed through the door and walked quickly to my truck. My heart was pounding, though I couldn't say exactly why. He had not threatened me. He had not done anything illegal. But something about him was wrong, deeply wrong in a way I could not articulate. I climbed into my cab and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was standing outside the restaurant, watching me drive away. Part 5. I got back on the highway and tried to shake off the encounter. Just a weird guy, I told myself. Oklahoma was full of them. I had met plenty of strange people on the road, and most of them were harmless. But I couldn't stop checking my mirrors. About 20 minutes later, I noticed headlights behind me. They had been there for a while, maintaining a steady distance, never getting closer, never falling back. I told myself it was just another driver going the same direction. The highway was a straight shot north, and plenty of people used it at night. But the headlights stayed with me, through the next town, past the next exit, mile after mile, always the same distance behind. I slowed down. The headlights slowed down. I sped up. The headlights sped up. I was being followed. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Someone is driving behind me on a public highway. That was not a crime. I decided to test it. The next exit was coming up in 2 miles. I would take it to pull into the gas station and see what happened. I put on my blinker and took the exit. The headlights followed. I pulled into the gas station and parked near the pumps under the bright lights. I watched the road, waiting to see if the car would pull in behind me. it did not. The vehicle, a pickup truck, drove slowly past the gas station entrance and kept going down the road. But I saw the driver look at me as he passed. It was him, the man from the KFC Part 6. I sat in my truck for a long time trying to calm down. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived in this direction and was just driving home. Maybe I was being paranoid. But my gut told me otherwise. I decided to wait at the gas station for a while, let him get far ahead of me. I went inside, bought a coffee, and talked to the clerk for a few minutes. When 30 minutes had passed, I got back on the road. The highway was dark and empty. No headlights behind me, no headlights ahead. I started to relax. Then, about 10 miles later, I saw something on the side of the road. A pickup truck parked on the shoulder lights off. The same pickup truck. I did not slow down. I kept my eyes forward and kept driving, passing the truck at 70 miles per hour. But in my mirror, I saw the truck's lights turn on. I saw it pull back onto the highway. He was following me again. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. My rig was not built for speed, but I got it up to 80, then 85. The headlights behind me kept pace. I grabbed my phone and called 911. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Carlos. I am a truck driver on Interstate 35 northbound, somewhere south of the Kansas border. There is a man following me. He has been following me for at least an hour. I think he is dangerous. The dispatcher asked for my exact location. I read off the mile marker. She said she was dispatching officers to intercept. Just stay on the highway, she said. Do not stop for any reason. I kept driving, watching the headlights in my mirror. They were getting closer now, closing the gap. Then, up ahead, I saw red and blue lights. A state trooper parked on an overpass, pulling onto the highway to intercept. The headlights behind me suddenly veered off, taking an exit I had not even noticed. By the time the trooper reached me, the pickup truck was gone. Part 7. The trooper pulled me over and I explained everything. He took my statement and called it in, but without a license plate number, there was not much he could do. He told me to stop at the next rest area and wait until daylight before continuing. I did not argue. I was exhausted and shaken. I pulled into a truck stop about 20 miles up the road and parked under the brightest lights I could find. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, that smile that did not reach his eyes. Around 4 a.m., there was a knock on my cab door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed the tire iron I kept under my seat and looked out the window. It was a state trooper, different from the one before. He asked me if I was Carlos, the driver who'd reported a follower. Yes, I said. Did you find him? The trooper's face was grim. We found the truck. It was abandoned about 30 miles south of here near a rest area. What about the driver? Gone. But we found some things in the truck bed. He paused. There was a tarp, some rope, and a shovel. And there were photos. Polaroids of drivers. All of them taken through windshields or at gas stations without them knowing. I felt my stomach turn. Am I in one of the photos? The trooper nodded slowly. You are. It looks like he was following you for a while before you noticed. There are 3 photos of you taken at different stops along your route. Part 8. They never caught him. The truck was registered to a fake name, and the fingerprints did not match anyone in the system. The police theorized he was some kind of predator who targeted long-haul truckers on isolated highways. When I did some research later, I found stories online from other drivers, men who had been followed by a pickup truck in rural Oklahoma and Kansas. Some of them had reported close calls, strange encounters at rest stops and gas stations. A few had reported finding GPS trackers on their vehicles. And there were a handful of truckers who had gone missing on that stretch of highway over the years. Their trucks were found abandoned, but they were never seen again. I stopped driving that route after that. I told my company I would take any assignment they had as long as it did not take me through Oklahoma. But I still drive trucks. I still spend long nights on dark highways, alone with my thoughts and the sound of the engine. And I still check my mirrors every few minutes, watching for headlights that stay too close for too long. I keep a gun in my cab now. I never stop at empty restaurants late at night. I always park under lights, always lock my doors, always trust my instincts. Because I know he is still out there. Maybe not him specifically, but someone like him. Someone who watches and waits and follows, and I know that next time I might not be so lucky. Story 3. The Freezer Part 1. My name is Marcus, and I was 19 years old when this happened. I worked as a cook at a KFC in Newark, New Jersey. It was a Friday night, 10:30 p.m., and I was the last person in the kitchen. My coworker had gone home sick, and I was handling the closing shift alone. That is when the manager told me I needed to go into the walk-in freezer to do inventory. I hated that freezer. It was old, the door stuck sometimes, and the light inside flickered like something out of a horror movie. But I went in anyway. And when the door closed behind me, I realized I was not alone. Before I continue, drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. And hit subscribe, because this story proves that the scariest things can happen in the places you think you know best. Part 2. I had been working at that KFC for about 8 months. It was my first real job, the kind of job you take when you're trying to save money for college, and your options are limited. The pay was minimum wage, the work was hot and greasy, and the customers were often rude. But it was a job, and I needed the money. The restaurant was in a busy part of Newark, on a street lined with fast food joints and bodegas. During the day, the place was chaotic, packed with customers and delivery drivers and people yelling orders. But at night, after the dinner rush died down, it got quiet. Friday nights were usually manageable. We stayed open until 11, but by 10 o'clock, the customer traffic slowed to a trickle. The closing crew was supposed to be me, another cook named Jerome, and the shift manager, a woman named Patricia. That Friday, Jerome got sick around 9:30. He was in the bathroom for 20 minutes, and when he came out, he looked green. Patricia sent him home and told me I would have to handle the kitchen alone for the last hour. I was not happy about it, but I did not argue. Patricia said she would help where she could, but she had to handle the front counter and the drive-thru. I was on my own. By 10:15, we had our last customer. A guy ordered a bucket of original recipe. I made it. Patricia handed it out the drive-thru window, and that was it. We were closed. Patricia started counting the register while I began cleaning the kitchen. We had a routine fryers first, then the prep stations, then the floors. The freezer inventory was supposed to be the last thing. Part 3. At 10:30, Patricia called me over to the manager's office. "I need you to do the freezer count tonight," she said. "We are low on some items, and I need to know what to order." I groaned internally, but nodded. The walk-in freezer was at the back of the kitchen, a big metal box that held all our frozen inventory. Chicken biscuit sides, everything. The problem with the freezer was that it was old. The restaurant had been there since the 80s, and I do not think the freezer had been replaced once. The door was heavy, and sometimes stuck. The light inside was dim and flickered constantly, and it was cold, obviously the kind of cold that seeped into your bones after just a few minutes. I grabbed the inventory clipboard and headed to the back. The freezer door was heavy, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. Cold air billowed out, misting in the warm kitchen air. I stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind me. It was easier to count inventory with the door closed, less cold air escaping, less noise from the kitchen. The freezer was about 10 feet deep and maybe 8 feet wide. Shelves lined both walls, stacked with boxes of chicken pieces, bags of frozen vegetables, and other supplies. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light that flickered every few seconds. I started counting. Original recipe thighs, 20 boxes. Extra crispy breasts, 15 boxes. Popcorn chicken, 8 bags. I was about halfway through when the light went out. Part 4. Complete darkness. The kind of darkness where you cannot see your hand in front of your face. I stood still, waiting for the light to flicker back on. Sometimes it did. That went dark for a few seconds before coming back. But the seconds stretched into a minute, and the light stayed off. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the shelves of frozen food and my own breath misting in the cold air. I walked to the door and pushed. It did not open. I pushed harder. Nothing. The door was stuck. I felt the first flutter of panic in my chest. This had happened before the door sticking, but usually a hard shove was enough to open it. I rammed my shoulder against the metal. Nothing. I banged on the door with my fist. "Patricia, Patricia, the freezer door is stuck." No response. The kitchen was on the other side of that door, and Patricia was in the manager's office at the front of the restaurant. She probably couldn't hear me. I banged harder. "Patricia, help." Silence. I tried to calm down. Patricia would notice I was gone eventually. She would come looking for me. I just had to wait. But then I heard something that made my blood freeze colder than the air around me. A sound behind me, in the freezer. The soft crunch of footsteps on frozen ground. Part 5. I spun around, shining my phone light towards the back of the freezer. The beam caught shape. A figure standing behind the last row of shelves. A man. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. He was standing perfectly still, watching me. "Who are you?" My voice came out higher than I intended. "What are you doing in here?" He did not answer. He just stood there, half hidden by the shadows, watching. I backed toward the door, keeping my light on him. "I'm calling the police. You need to get out of here." He took a step forward, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. I hammered on the door with my free hand. "Patricia, help me. There is someone in here." The man kept coming. He was close enough now that I could see his face. Gaunt, hollow cheeks, dark eyes that reflected the light from my phone. A thin smile that seemed wrong somehow, like it belonged on a different face. She cannot hear you, he said. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. It is just us now. I felt the door handle dig into my back. I grabbed it and yanked with everything I had. The door did not move. The man was 5 feet away now. 4, 3. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a frozen box of chicken from the nearest shelf and threw it at his face. Part 6. The box hit him square in the forehead. He stumbled back more surprised than hurt, and I used the moment to shove past him deeper into the freezer. It was a dead end. There was no other exit. But there was a narrow gap between 2 of the shelving units, just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I wedged myself into the gap, my back against one shelf and my feet braced against the other. The cold metal bit into my skin through my uniform, but I did not care. I was hidden, at least for the moment. I heard him moving, footsteps crunching on the frosted floor. He was looking for me. "You cannot hide forever," he said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "This freezer is not that big, and no one is coming to save you." I held my breath. My phone was still in my hand, the flashlight off now. I didn't want him to see the glow. I thought about Patricia. She had to notice I was gone by now. I had been in the freezer for at least 10 minutes. She would come looking. She had to. Then I heard a sound that made my heart stop. The freezer door opening. "Marcus," Patricia's voice muffled by distance. "Are you still in there? I need you to finish up. We have to go." The man's footsteps stopped. I heard him breathing heavy and slow, just a few feet from my hiding spot. "Patricia." I screamed. "Call the police. There is someone in here." I heard Patricia gasp. I heard her footsteps running away. I heard her voice distant yelling into a phone. And then I heard the man curse under his breath and run toward the open door. Part 7. I scrambled out of my hiding spot and ran for the door. The man was already through it, shoving past the shelves in the kitchen, heading for the back exit. I burst out of the freezer just in time to see him slam through the emergency exit door and disappear into the alley behind the restaurant. Patricia was in the office phone, pressed to her ear, her face pale. She had called the police. I collapsed against the counter, gasping for air that was not freezing cold. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. The police arrived in about 8 minutes. They searched the alley and the surrounding area, but the man was gone. One of the officers found how he had gotten in. The back door, the one that led to the alley, had been pried open. The lock was old and weak, and he had forced it sometime during the dinner rush when the kitchen was loud and chaotic, and no one would have noticed. He had hidden in the freezer for hours waiting. The officer who took my statement shook his head. "You are lucky your manager came looking when she did. Another few minutes, and who knows what would have happened." Part 8. They never caught him. The security camera footage showed a blurry image of a thin man in dark clothes entering through the back door around 6 p.m., but his face was never clearly visible. The police said he was probably a transient someone passing through looking for easy targets. But I do not think he was just passing through. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he smiled. He had done this before. He knew what he was doing. I quit my job at KFC 2 days later. I could not go back to that kitchen, could not walk past that freezer door without feeling the cold seeping into my bones, without hearing his voice in my head. It is just us now. For months afterward, I had nightmares. I would dream about being trapped in the dark, the cold pressing in on all sides, footsteps getting closer. I would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, convinced someone was standing in the corner of my room. I started therapy, and it helped. But some things stay with you. Some fears do not go away. I am 23 now. I work in an office 9 to 5, surrounded by people. I never work alone. I never stay late. And I never ever go into a room without checking what is behind the door first. Because I learned something that night. The places you think are safe, the places you walk through every day without a second thought, they can turn dangerous in an instant. All it takes is one person hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. And by the time you realize they are there, it might already be too late.